And welcome back to another episode of the Total Sports Live podcast here on Anchor. This is Jovan Alpha, and you already know who I'm joined by my guy Harrison Brown as we're going to discuss and preview Eagles playoff action. Yes, your town, your team, your Philadelphia Eagles are in the playoffs, number one seed in the NFC. Their playoff journey begins Saturday night against the New York Giants in the NFC Divisional round on Saturday night in Lincoln Financial Field at 8:15, I think, on Fox. So we're going to on tonight's podcast is recording this. We're going to break down the matchup, looking at just looking at how the Giants did last week against the Vikings, and also talking about what's happened in the playoffs thus far. Because, like I said, the Eagles had the number one seed, so they didn't have to play last week, but there was a whole wide, just a lot of craziness that happened in the playoffs last weekend, and we're going to talk about it as well. In addition to the Eagles, who are making their second consecutive trip to the playoffs under Nick Sirianni. However, before we do that, make sure you're following us on Twitter at Total Sports Live. You're checking out the website, totalsportslive.com. Matt Brown. I always had to say Matt Brown because I don't want to confuse Matt Brown and Matt Cass. Matt Brown has you, as always, with the Eagles Weekly Recap, giving you the latest news and tidbits that you need to know about your Philadelphia Eagles. We got that running off. Got a lot of other stuff coming on the pipeline on the site. We'll discuss that more at the end of the podcast. And make sure you're checking us out on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, lastly on Anchor. All you got to do on those platforms, search Total Sports Live, TSO Podcast. Again, really appreciate everyone that takes the time out to tune into the podcast wherever you're at, whether that be on your phone or your computer or on YouTube, as we also upload these to YouTube. Really appreciate the support and always tuning in as we discuss anything in the world of football, whether it be the draft, USFL, XFL, Eagles, fantasy. It's all here on the TSL podcast. But Harrison, it's been a minute since it's only been us doing the podcast. The last time we talked about the Eagles, they were going into their matchup against the Saints, and that didn't go too well. It didn't go too well.
Not.
It didn't go well, but now we're back and we're hoping for better vibes as they're now the number one seed in the NFC, clinched the NFC East crown, and they get to face a team that they just saw a couple weeks ago in the New York Giants. But before we do all that, how are you been?
Man, everything's good over here. It is playoff football, and the Eagles are in the playoffs. You can't beat it, especially in this area. But now you just mentioned, the Eagles saw the Giants recently. They're going for that tough task of beating a team 3 times in 1 year. Any level of football, that is not an easy feat. So, it's certainly going to be an interesting game against a scrappy Giants team. But it's playoff football. It's at the Link Saturday night. You got all day to get ready for the game. I think it's going to be a legendary NFC East postseason clash. I mean, you really can't beat it.
No, you can't. And like you said, it's hard to beat a team 3 times in the season, but as we saw last week in the playoffs, this is not as hard. The Niners pulled off the feat, beating the Seahawks 3 times and blew them out in a very deciding fashion, but that was more so because of just second half just went the Niners complete way. We also had the Ravens and the Bengals face off against each other for the 3rd time, and I think Bengals they split the series, and Bengals took it 2-1, and then we had the Bills and the Dolphins play each other for the 3rd time. They split the season series, and then the Bills won the playoff game with 37-34 or something like that. So
Skylar Thompson played them tough.
Yes, he did. He did. So we saw a lot of division matchups play out and replay themselves, or just even regular season matchups play out and play themselves out in super wild card. Let me say that super wild card weekend. I'll say wild card weekend, super wild card weekend. But what stood out to you from last week's action? Because there was a lot of things that happened. I mean, epic collapses, Dak having, a career performance, Brady falling flat on his face. I mean, it was just a whole bunch of stuff that happened in the span of like 2 days in the NFL.
Yeah, you said it right there. It was an eventful super wild card weekend. I like the super. It's nice and new. Right. Super wild card weekend. Really get people amped up. But a great weekend of football. I think wild card weekend is always an exciting weekend. You're starting off the playoffs, and when you really, that Saturday slate of games, you mentioned it. San Fran really took hold of that game in the second half. It was a pretty close game, 17-16, I believe. At halftime, Seattle was up, and that from there, San Fran, I don't think they let them score again in the second half. They really dominated that game, controlled the game. And then how about that Jacksonville game? Our old friend Doug Peterson, Trevor Lawrence throws 4 first-half interceptions, I think 3 in the first quarter. Asante Samuel Jr. with 3 interceptions in a game. Ridiculous.
Looking like his daddy out there.
Literally. I mean, 3 interceptions in a postseason game. I mean, that's a feat. Definitely tough to wind up on the losing end of it, but, through no fault of his own. But, yeah, that was an incredible game. Doug Peterson with a lot of his aggressive and out there play calls, running the wing tee and running a sweep to the outside when everyone thinks he's going to quarterback sneak it with his 6'5" quarterback and the long arms. And yeah, just, a great game, a lot of fun. Definitely a classic playoff game. I think those Jacksonville fans will remember that for a while. They've got a tough one this weekend versus the Chiefs. I don't know if it's going to go that exact same way, but definitely a fun game. And then how about just the backup quarterbacks in general? I mentioned Skylar Thompson. He wasn't picture perfect in that game by any means, but let's keep it real. At the end of the day, they found a way to put up some points. He looked better later in the game, kind of when it was down to that crunch time. He looked a little bit more comfortable. The interception where he's kind of backed up in his end zone and just tosses it up to Kyrie Irving, can't have that. But I thought overall, all 3 backup quarterbacks, Brock Purdy down in San Fran, obviously got the win. Tyler Huntley out in Baltimore. I thought all of them stepped up and did a good job. And I think that kind of just goes to show how important that position is, the backup quarterback position and quarterbacks in general. I mean, we're talking about a year in the NFL where 68 quarterbacks played, an NFL record, the most ever.
It was a lot of guys.
It was a lot of quarterbacks. We can go down the line. It's guys getting called in midweek. I feel like ever since 2020, that COVID year, quarterback play remember Garrett Gilbert was signed by Washington with like 2 or 3 days before that Tuesday game.
Played the Eagles straight out to AAF. Well, the AAF wasn't around, but you get the drift.
Listen, we're AAF. That's a perfect segue into what I was going to say. That's why these XFL, USFL leagues, these undrafted free agent day 3 quarterbacks like Brock Purdy, Skylar Thompson, the list goes on. It's why it's so important. Developing the position is so important. Getting guys games reps. Listen, Skylar Thompson, Brock Purdy, these guys are 7th-round picks less than a year ago. And then they're starting playoff games, on competitive teams.
And Huntley was a UDFA.
There you go. So it's a very important position. And I think that kind of just goes to show. And I thought all 3 guys, they had their moments that they looked good and looked like they were in control of the offense. Listen, at the end of the day, were any of them perfect? No, Brock Purdy included. We were talking about that pre-show. It was a nice win for them. They really took control of things in the second half. But Brock Purdy was far from perfect. Definitely, was kind of one of his worst performances to date in San Fran. So, but it just overall, I thought it was really encouraging to see backup quarterbacks going out there and making a name for themselves. It's something we've seen in the playoffs before. I remember Ryan Lindley started the game for Arizona. AJ McCarron in the beginning of his career as like a rookie or second-year guy stepped in for Dalton. So it's something that happens. Matt McGloin. Yeah, wow. Matt McGloin, New York Guardians.
Legend. No, and I think that's probably one of the major highlights from this weekend. Like you said, seeing 3 backups, starting, 2 because of injury, and 1 who was the third one? It was Thompson Huntley. Who was the other guy that was starting?
Purdy's injury,
Purdy, injury.
Right,
correct. Yeah. So seeing those 3 guys putting in a playoff position where they probably think they weren't going to be in the playoff position, right? If you're Skylar Thompson, you're thinking, I'm just going to, chill on the bench this season and soak up knowledge. And it's like, no, I'm actually going to play in a playoff game. And Purdy the same way. Like, you don't expect Jimmy Garoppolo to get hurt. Now you're in, on a team with high playoff expectations and that kind of like, get them to the spot where a lot of people think they could be, and that's a lot of pressure. And then, like you said, Huntley, a guy that it's not his first rodeo, right? Because he played a little bit last season, but first playoff experience again, just like with Thompson, even with Purdy, started off a little rough with the interception, but then the light bulb went off and he started to look. And I think that was so encouraging for me watching him. And was like he was looking because I think there was a little bit towards the end of the season where I think people were getting down on him. In his game, it was just kind of like, man, I don't know. Because remember when he played, everybody was like, he could, be a starter in this league. And then this season, when he started playing and the play wasn't equaling out, it was kind of like, I don't know if he's a starting caliber quarterback. What I saw from him in that game was after the interception, something just seemed like just the light just clicked on for him, and he was just locked in, just making plays. And then unfortunately, they have the fumble there. I mean, talk about just unfortunate, right?
Crazy.
You never see a quarterback go for a quarterback sneaking, and the ball just pops in the air and just goes backwards, then gets picked up and return, 98 yards for a return, for a touchdown return. But I think that kind of sums up like just the season for the Ravens in general, right?
Yeah.
That sums up just their issues.
Honestly, the past few years for them, with the running backs all getting hurt last year, and then this year with Lamar getting hurt late in the year, and that quarterback sneak, you mentioned it, that's a really tough situation for Huntley. He's trying to go over the pile,
right? When he probably should, when he probably right, and the Eagles go under the.
That's what they're saying, right? We've seen it this year. They got guys pushing the quarterback. It's funny, that's something we saw in Arena for years, where the fullback would just get right into there and push the quarterback. Now we're seeing it in the NFL. It was kind of a situation
or even in the CFL on the short yard, the second they bring in the the Chris Strevelers or the Antonio Pimpkins, and they just come in second down, second and short, boom, push the pile, keep it pushing. Like it's an art. It's an art.
Something we're seeing in the NFL now. The Eagles have really kind of made it popular, and I think the Ravens were looking to do that, and it just was a really unfortunate situation. Huntley just kind of got stuck, right before that end zone, and they were able to just knock that ball out. But
you have the defender doing a punch out, which all defenders are now doing for some reason. Defenders aren't tackling no more; they're trying to punch the ball out.
Punch that ball. Hey, the ball is the money. You know what I mean? You don't get paid for tackles; you get paid for turnovers.
You don't.
No, like you said, I was impressed with Huntley's game as well, and honestly, his season as a whole. I know it wasn't as maybe flashy as last year. I thought that he did a good job managing the Ravens offense. I thought he did a good job keeping them flowing, keeping them winning games. We've said it on this podcast before. I still feel comfortable saying Tyler Huntley's one of the 32. I think he's one of the 32 starting quarterbacks in the NFL. How that shakes out, how that plays out, we'll see. But I would feel comfortable, going into a year, giving him an opportunity as a starting quarterback somewhere.
His career projection for me, he could end up being like Tyrod Taylor, right? Sure. Tyrod was in Baltimore, and then he eventually got a chance, right, to start, in Buffalo before Josh Allen got there, right? Because there was a period of football where Josh Allen wasn't there, right? And Tyrod did lead him to the playoffs. That was what, him and the LaShawn McCoy era real quick, and he did lead him to the playoffs.
Like 2015.
Yeah, he led him to the playoffs, and then
started a lot of games in the NFL, won a lot of games in the NFL, a lot of different situations, unique situations where there might be a first-round pick in the wings, and you still need him to go out there and win games. I definitely agree.
I can see Huntley, filling that void. So hey, hopefully we have some interesting and intriguing games this weekend in the divisional round. Hopefully there's no epic collapses, for none of these games. Hopefully we just see nice competitive, action-packed games that, come down to the wire. Well, hopefully not the Eagles. But speaking about those Eagles, they're back in the playoffs for the second straight year under Nick Sirianni, which isn't impressive considering where this team was last season, heading into the season, and just where they were at the midway point of this season.
Oh, yeah, even like a few weeks in.
And how much they've done a complete 360 from that time in his first year to this year. This year has been a complete 360-degree change. However, the last time we saw this Eagles team in the playoffs, they got blasted by Tom Brady and company, 31-15. It wasn't pretty. Yeah, you just felt like we talked about before the show. You just felt like they ran into a buzzsaw in that game. It was just kind of like, all right, they're going into enemy territory. This is going to go really bad really quickly, and it went bad really quickly for them. Like I said, 31-15. I think Hurts had a touchdown pass. He also had 2 interceptions in that game. I don't think the Eagles got anything going on the ground in that game, if I'm not mistaken. I don't think they did in that game. Yeah, I don't think they did. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't pretty in that game. They were down 17-0 at the half, and actually they were down 31-0 late into the third quarter before scoring 15 in the fourth quarter.
That's right. They got some back at the end.
Yeah, but they were getting smacked. Boston Scott, Miles Sanders didn't really do much in the game. Dallas Goedert had a big game. Devontae had a big game, but it got really dark really quickly for this Eagles team as they had no answers for Brady and company, who then got beat the next week against the Rams. But what do you think, looking forward to this playoff run now starting on Saturday night against the Giants, Harrison? What do you think this team can learn from that experience heading into this year that can help them, especially when, we're talking about now a second year head coach with his now second year full-time starter quarterback now in the playoffs for the second year? What do you think they can take from the experience last year and heading into this year and be like, we do this this time around, we'll be in better shape than what we didn't do last year?
I think that's it right there. The fact that they're in their second year and now they have some playoff experience to go off. It's not a foreign situation that they're walking into. First playoff game ever, never having experienced that buzz, that excitement of a playoff game. Because listen, it is different than a regular season game. There's different stakes on the line. There's different pressure. It's win or go home. There's a different
possessions mean more.
Every possession means more. You know what I mean? Especially when you're playing Tom Brady. Listen, they were down 31-0, so maybe those late possessions didn't mean as much. But especially when you're playing Tom Brady early in the game, to have that mindset, even if it didn't work out, even if they weren't able to go execute, score points, which they weren't, but even that's, you know what I mean, still just having that mindset, having that preparation throughout the week, I think it was definitely good for them. And to go against someone of Tom Brady's caliber to start it out, you know what I mean? It's just a good thing overall, in my opinion. Good to have that experience to kind of get their feet wet on both fronts. Sirianni's front and Jalen Hurts' front, maybe more important for Sirianni than Jalen. People might want to say getting the quarterback out there, but for a coach to be able to go out there and manage the game, to be able to go through that, game week, game prep for a playoff game, scripting a playoff game. Hey, what are we going to do if we have the ball with 15 seconds left and we're down 3? Kind of going through those mental preparations of if our season's on the line, what are we going to do? The Eagles coaching staff has now went through that. I think that's only going to be a positive thing for them. I think having the bye last week is a positive thing for them, to give them another week to kind of reset off the regular season, maybe go back and look at some of that playoff film and look at some of their playoff preparation from last year when they played Brady. So I think it's a positive thing. I think it's something they can build off, something they can grow off of, and use to their advantage this week against the New York Giants. We saw last week, it was Daniel Jones' first playoff experience, Brian Daboll's first playoff experience as a head coach. Listen, you can go out there and win with that, but it's definitely not ideal. It definitely gives you a little bit more pause going into it. And if this was Jalen and Nick Sirianni's first playoff experience, like if they had lost one extra game last year and missed the playoffs, we would all kind of be like, well, Jalen's never played in the playoffs before. Sirianni's never coached in the playoffs before.
Even if they did have the number one seed, right?
It still would be a question mark. Well, Daniel Jones just beat the Vikings. We've seen him in the playoffs. We've never seen. So it's good that they have that experience, that kind of background to them. Now let's go build on it. Let's go win a game here. You know what I mean? Take on an NFC conference championship at the Link in a few weeks. That's only going to be good for their development and their growth as a head coach and quarterback as well.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with you. I think that's, like you said, experience, right? That's the main thing you could take from it, because like you said, in the playoffs, drives mean more, being able to make plays, not having those critical mistakes. Everything is amplified more. I mean, shoot, it even seems like as a fan, when you're watching the game seems faster, right? Yep. The game seems to go a little bit more faster because it's not like, all right, it's the regular season, hum-ho, take your time. It's like, no, you're tuned in, you're locked into every possession. Like you said, they can take from the experience of like, hey, like we want to come out and start fast right away. You don't want to, like you said, get down 31-0, even though I don't think they would get down 31-0, against this Giants team. But it goes back to, you want to have fast starts. You want to go out and kind of set the tone right away, because that's what we saw the Giants do against the Vikings team last week. They were able to set the tone against Minnesota. You would have thought that the Giants were the number 3 seed and not Minnesota. The way they came out, boom, Minnesota comes down, scores 7-0. They said, all right, shoot, come back on their first drive, get the ball to Saquon, all tackle run to the house, 7-7. You now feel like, oh, we have a chance in this game, because look what we just did to their defense. So I think for the Eagles, I think for them, it's just going to be about coming out and setting the tone. Rather, that means you have the ball first on offense, or if you're playing defense, and getting this Giants offense off the field in a 3-and-out and not letting them convert on third downs, because that was one of the things that helped them in their game against the Vikings. They converted a lot on third downs, and that's, I think, going to be a real key in this game.
Absolutely, I agree. It's going to be so important to control this game. And I think the way the Eagles are going to do that on both sides of the ball is the line of scrimmage. Like you mentioned, those third downs. How do you get stops on third down? Stop the run. If it's third and short, you need your interior defensive lineman to go step up there. If it's third and long, you got to get after the pass rush. You've got to come with the pass rush and get a sack or rush the quarterback into a bad read, bad decision. And I think that's somewhere the Eagles could be strong in this game. But absolutely, start fast and then finish strong. It's not just start fast. Let's look at the LA Chargers. They came out
started
blazing.
fast.
They came out as fast as possible. 4 interceptions in the first half, all that. You got to be able to finish strong too. And that's something the Eagles have really done a good job of. That's part of the reason they're 14-3, you know what I mean? And all that success when Jalen's in at quarterback, they've done a good job protecting leads, you know what I mean? Controlling the clock, getting the run game going. Let's get Miles Sanders, Kenneth Gainwell, those types of guys, involved in the run game, the short pass game, the quick little outside screen game. The Eagles have done a really good job protecting leads this year. That's going to be very important in the playoffs. I mean, look, the Chargers are the team on everyone's mind, right now after last week's collapse. It can happen in the NFL, man. You cannot fall asleep. Just because you have a lead, you cannot start thinking about the NFC Conference Championship. You've got to go out there and play a full 60 minutes of football. And that's something that Sirianni and the coaching staff have really done a good job of, just making sure that the team is all, they really have protected leads very well this year.
Yeah, and they take it one game at a time, right? They don't never think too far ahead or look back at what they could have done if they had lost, right? Like what we could have done, or even if they won and they're not happy with their, play, not looking back like, man, should have did this. They're always thinking one game at a time and next game mentality. And I think what you said was also true, right? Being able to close and finish. And I think no matter what the sport is, right? In the playoffs is always hard to win a game and to close it out, right? When we're talking about, baseball, right? I'm talking about looking at the Phillies, to win that first game on a series is always the hardest, right? Because you're setting a tone. But just to get to that point, to close it out, is tough to do. It's tough, and we're talking about sports that are like series, right? NBA, NHL, MLB. It's always the hard part is to close out a series and win. In football, it's the same way, but there's no series, right?
You got to do it that day.
You gotta finish strong, and you have to start strong, but you have to close it out and not get, like you said, like the Chargers complacent, and then before you know, the other team's building back momentum, and now you're at the other team's mercy because you cannot do nothing when that momentum is completely switched to the other side.
The other sport comparison is great. Momentum in sports, you know what I mean? It can kind of be translated like a closer in the 9th inning of a big, maybe pivotable game in a series.
Look at Phillies Cardinals game 1.
There you go. And it's a game changer for the whole series. If the Phillies don't win that game, who knows? So momentum is huge in football, and it's something the Eagles have really captured. And look, I'm not going to do it too much tonight, but let's go back 5 years and let's think about the momentum that team had in 2017 when the Eagles won the Super Bowl. Think about the momentum they had coming into the playoffs and some of the things that Foles did at the end of the year. Just that momentum.
Had a couple of close wins.
They did, yeah. The Raiders, man, they had some ugly ones, but momentum is so important. And I think if the Eagles can really start the game strong, it definitely would go off and set a tone. If Saquon had a similar run to what he had against the Vikings, one of those long touchdown runs, not that it would flatten out the link. I mean, the link would bounce back, but it would certainly, you know what I mean? It would put a pause on the celebrations. It would put a big pause on the celebrations. So let's start fast. You know what I mean? If they're on defense, let's get a stop and then fire out on offense.
That's definitely the key. So we're going to talk about that. You mentioned offense. Let's jump into that and talk about that. One of the biggest things to watch for on Saturday night's game will be the Eagles play calling, which we know that has been a topic of discussion over the last couple of weeks, especially on the offensive side of things, and how they went kind of path happy in the regular season finale against the Giants with Jalen Hurts back, kind of went a little path happy and not really went too much into the run game, which a lot of people thought they would have did because you're facing the team against the Giants that doesn't defend the run very well. Than the week before against the Saints, you don't really run the ball against the team that doesn't really stop the run really well. So there's been some discussion. Obviously, there has been some discussion about the play calling on offense and if they can establish the run game. Do you think that for this team to have success on Saturday night that they have to get the running game, established? Like you can't go into Saturday night, first quarter, and not even first quarter, first half, and Miles Sanders only has 2 carries at the
Absolutely,
end
I
of the
agree.
first half. You can't have that.
No, I agree. I think the run game is going to be pivotal. Like I was talking about a few minutes ago, controlling the game. You know what I mean? Keeping the Giants off the field a little bit, keeping the ball in the Eagles' hands, getting first downs, picking up first downs with Miles Sanders, who had a
Mm-hmm.
really impressive year, and just the running back rotation as a whole. I'd like to see all the guys get going. And it's not something I'm drastically concerned about, but it has to be mentioned that Jalen Hurts is still recovering from a shoulder injury, from a
Yes.
sprained shoulder. So if you
Yes.
can get the running game going, kind of take some of that burden off of him, that's only going to help. But then at the same time, I'll sit here and counter that with I still think Jalen Hurts should be involved in the run game, and I think he'll be
Yes.
capable to. I don't think that it'll be a huge thing. I don't think it's something you should fade. I think it's been a part of the Eagles' game plan, and I think he's going to be out there ready to play. I think it's something that they can use to their advantage. But if you can really get that traditional run game going, kind of keep some of that off him, keep some of those hits not only in the run game but also the pass game, especially if you're establishing the run. I think that would be a good thing for the offense as a whole. Like you said, can't have Miles Sanders only with 2 carries in the first half or anything like that. I don't want to hear about RPOs or trying to get the quick game going and
Right.
things of that nature. I think it's important to establish the run game kind of to that point, and to the point you made about they threw the ball a lot some games, and some games they'll be real run happy, but recently it's been real pass happy. I read a interesting article in The Athletic this week about Shane Steichen and just kind of about his offensive philosophies, and really the theme of the article was just his feel for the game, kind of the way that he feels the game. Sometimes I was kind of reading that it's not necessarily always balancing it out throughout the whole game. The Eagles might take 9 passes in a row like they did when they played the Giants back early in the year when they came out on that first drive and Jalen Hurts threw the ball, I think 10 times on the drive. I don't know if they ran the ball more than once.
It was like one.
So
I think it might have been
literally,
like 10 pass, like 10 passes, like one run.
so from what I was reading, it just kind of seems like Steichen is more concerned with what's the matchup we have. You know what I mean? If there's 10 openings for a pass play right now, let's go get it, and then we'll run the ball later. So it's
Which
not
is fair. Which is fair.
I'm not opposed to it. At times that can be a risky game. If
Yeah.
you start, because
Because you're
then
playing into
defenses
the team.
adjust.
Mm-hmm.
So on that 8th pass, if the defense adjusts and they take a pick 6, it doesn't look great. But
No,
it was an interesting article. It was an interesting read, just kind of about him and his philosophies as he's in this coaching candidate search. Just a little bit more about him. But I think it's something to consider going into this game, that it might not all be run early, it might not all be pass early, but the Eagles kind of find their way one way or the other to be a balanced attack, even if it's not all that on the first drive or the first quarter. They kind of find their way to being a balanced offense.
Yeah, balance is going to be the key, right? You look at they won the last time they beat them, they beat them 22-16, but that was really against the Giants second and third team defense, second, third team offense. But when you look at when they played them back in week 14, they had an excellent showing running the ball. Miles Sanders, the main catalyst of this, 17 carries for 144 yards and 2 touchdowns. I mean, that's the type of production you're going to need. Not saying Miles needs to run for 144 yards on Saturday night, but getting him in the groove, getting him going, being able to see him rip off long runs, because like you said, then that takes pressure off of Hurts. It's like he has to carry the run game, even though he did a good job in that game. Running the ball as well. I think he had 77 yards. I think. Let me see. 7 carries for 77 yards and a touchdown, and then Boston Scott had his 33 yards and a touchdown. So they ran the ball consistently well, and that's been the thing, right? When this team is running the ball, and this is something that always wondered why do they shy away from this? Like, do not shy away from your identity, right? We know that you have the weapons on offense to throw the ball around the park. I mean, you have the Devontae Smiths, the A.J. Browns, the Dallas Goddards, right? The Quez Watkins. You have the weapons to fling it out there to whoever you want. But remember who you are. You are a run team. You guys were one of the best rushing offenses in the league. And there's not a lot of teams in the NFL that can say that, right? Like, maybe the Browns, but that's because of Nick Chubb, right? We're talking about a system of guys that can run the ball and run it effectively. The Eagles were that team last year. They can run it. They can run it with the best of them, and it's up to you to stop them. I mean, You look at their rushing offense, they were top 5 in rushing offense this season. The other 4 teams ahead of them, the Giants, because of Saquon, Daniel Jones, the Falcons, because of the combination, we're talking a combination of Cordell
That's actually
Patterson,
surprising.
Tyler Algier,
Yeah, maybe Mariota too.
Mariota.
In part, yeah. But that's actually surprising that they were that high.
Me too, because I
Yeah.
didn't think that they, but I think probably because they piled it on a little bit towards the end. Number 2, Baltimore at 160 rushing yards per game, which, that's not surprising looking at their stable of running backs. And then number 1 rushing offense, 177.3 yards per game, the Chicago Bears. Justin Fields.
Yeah.
But you feed the top 5 teams. Out of the top 5 teams, I can't include the Falcons yet. You could include them. Top 5 teams, all of them have a running game, like a running back by committee system, and all of them have a dual threat quarterback. That's really telling.
It is really telling, and I think the reason that the Eagles are the best of that list is because of the offensive line. I think the Eagles' offensive line is where that separation comes, and I think it is an advantage for them against this Giants team. Now, the Giants are a scrappy defense. That's something that me and you both agreed on pre-show. It's a scrappy, tough defense that really likes to get after it. They like to blitz a lot. They blitz 44.7% of the time this regular season, most in the NFL. Last week, they still got after it. They blitzed a lot on the Vikings, but they also
I think it was only like 20. I think it was only like 22% blitz. I think
they still got after it. It was certainly less than where they were in the regular season. They got
Wink
after
is like Wink Martindale's like a 50%. Like
he is. He is. That's what they were in Week 14 against Jalen and the Eagles. They didn't get to Kirk Cousins on the stat sheet in terms of sacks. They did record 11 quarterback hits in the game, though. They were around Kirk Cousins.
That's basically a sack in my eyes. Like,
I'll take it. Yeah,
if you're getting pressures and hurries, you're doing
third down incompletions. If it's a quarterback hurry and he tosses it out of bounds, I'll take that all day. So, it's certainly an aggressive defense. They like to get after it. But I think the offensive line for the Eagles is kind of how you counter that. I think that them stepping up and stepping into their zones. And like you said, let's get some long Miles Sanders runs going. If we've got an aggressive Giants defense in front of the Eagles, pop a long run, I'm certainly intrigued by that matchup. I think it's going to be a big part of it. How the Giants defense plays, guys like Kayvon Thibodeau, Leonard Williams. They have a good defensive line overall. They have a good front.
They definitely have a very good front on both sides, right? Offensive and defensive line that's developing, that's growing, and that will give teams issues, for years to come, because they have some young guys on both sides of the ball that can really, wreak some havoc on both ends. It's I think that's one of the many storylines to pay attention to in this matchup. But before we look at the other storylines, to pay attention to as we get you prepared for Saturday night's action at the link. This is a Total Sports Live podcast here on Anchor. Jovan and Harrison breaking down Eagles Giants NFC Divisional Round playoff Saturday night at the link, 8:15 on Fox. Should be a good one. And we already mentioned a couple of the storylines in this game. The running game, the battle in the trenches on both ends. The battle of trenches, I probably think has been probably one of our top storylines going into the game, especially that Eagles defensive line, Harrison. We talked, before the show, we just talked about the defensive line rotation. And you reminded me how this defensive line is now stacked with everybody healthy now. Everybody's ready to go at the right time. And it was looking kind of bleak because there was a certain point towards the end of the season where he was like, this guy's injured, this guy's hurt, this guy's hurt. I don't know if everybody's going to be healthy. It's like everybody that you need healthy on a defensive line is healthy and ready to go for the playoffs.
Coming together at the right time. That bye was really perfect for the Eagles. Getting that 1 seed. It's why it was so important in that Giants game, in that Week 18 game, that they won that game and that Dallas lost against Washington. I think it was either or. But that defensive line, that's really where I'm sitting for this Eagles. You've said it. That's kind of been the storyline of the pod tonight, is the trenches and really the Eagles defensive line in particular. That group is so strong and versatile and deep. It's just they've got so many fresh legs. And I really credit that to Howie Roseman in the front office going out and getting Ndamukong Suh, Linval Joseph, and Robert Quinn midseason. That's 3. I mean, listen, are they older now? They're not Pro Bowl guys this year, all that. That's 3 quality professional defensive linemen. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. We've seen Suh make a lot of plays in that interior, helping out. Maybe it hasn't been highlight plays and, crushing the stats sheet with 3 sacks and 5 tackles for loss, but important plays, man, stuffing up the middle of those interior offensive lines, getting
Which was an
pressure all
issue
court.
earlier in the season
A
when they were
huge
having
issue.
issues stopping the run.
A huge issue, and it would be a huge point of concern. And it really still is a point of concern, even with all those additions, when you're facing Saquon Barkley and the Giants offense. So that's really where I'm looking. You look on the edge, Hassan Reddick, 16 sacks, Brandon Graham and Josh Sweat with 11 each. Then you go inside, Javon Hargrave with 11 sacks, Fletcher Cox with 7. I mean, the defensive line was unbelievable this year, 70 sacks, most in the NFL. They got after quarterbacks with a 33.3 pressure rate, second highest in the NFL. And we mentioned it, Robert Quinn's coming back from injury. I think that's going to be a key point. The Giants' offensive line, it's improved. We've mentioned the young guys. Andrew Thomas was all pro this year. That's great to see for them. That's an anchor piece to their offensive line. Evan Neal was, rated the highest.
He's the real deal. He's the real deal.
He is. He was rated the highest offensive lineman, offensive tackle in last year's draft, highest drafted offensive lineman. Just, an absolute unbelievable physically, throughout the combine and all that type of process. Everyone was just in awe of his physicality. But he's had his adjustments to the NFL too. It hasn't all been perfect. PFF actually has him rated as the 71st offensive tackle in all of the NFL. That's not great to hear, you know. So does he have a lot of upside? Does he have all the traits? Yes. Is he fully there yet? Not yet. Maybe it's next year. Maybe it's 2 or 3 years down the line. I don't think that's really the concern here, is that Evan Neal is not going to be a good player. But can the Eagles take advantage of him this week in his second playoff start with the quality, outstanding depth and versatility and just the amount of fresh legs
and veteran linemen that they're going against?
Have been doing it for years, have been doing it since Evan Neal was back in high school, middle school with Brandon Graham, hey, that's real when you talk 10, 11 years in the league. So it's Evan Neal is definitely going to have a great future. I think it could be somewhere the Eagles get after the Giants. Left guard isn't the Giants' strength. They've been rotating guys there, haven't really had a set left guard the past few weeks. I think interiorly, Javon Hargrave, Fletcher Cox, those types of guys, they could get something going there. So that's going to be something I'm watching all game. I mentioned it to you pre-show. I feel like I can't get my eyes off the Eagles' defensive line. We were talking about some of the linebackers. You asked me what I thought. I was like, talk to me about the defensive line. I feel like that's all I watch when I watch these Eagles games. They just get after the quarterback, stop the run game, and it's going to be so important this week against Daniel Jones and Saquon Barkley.
Yeah, that's definitely going to be the key in this matchup. Can the Eagles defensive line, can that rotation live up to the standard that was set with, like you said, them having 70 sacks this season, a league high, which is just incredible for a team that really doesn't blitz, that doesn't blitz extra men. They really depend on their defensive line. So it's going to be up to them. This is the money making time for them, and leads into for one of my storylines, which is just the defensive line got to get pressure on Daniel Jones. You look at the last time when they played Jones, the Eagles won that game 48-22. They sacked Daniel Jones 4 times. They sacked Tyrod Taylor 3 times in that game. Eagles defense had 7 sacks in that game, 10 tackles for loss, and 12 quarterback hits. They need similar type production like this on Saturday. Now, granted, are they going to get 7 sacks on Daniel Jones? No, I don't see that happen unless the offensive line is just completely just getting overwhelmed, which is not impossible because the Eagles have that depth there on the edges to do so.
If they do, I think they'll win. I think if they get 7 sacks, I feel comfortable saying if the Eagles get 7 sacks on Saturday, they should be in the NFC Conference Championship.
Right. They give 7 sacks, then.
The Chargers got 4 picks last weekend, and Asante Samuel had 3, and they lost. So maybe let me not say that, because we see some crazy things.
We have. But again, if the Eagles, but if they are able to get sacks, are able to get pressure, now you're putting that Giants team in second and long, third and long. Yep. So now you're not allowing them to convert third down at a high percentage. Because like I said, in last week's game against the Vikings, I think they were 7-10 on third downs. 7-13. 7-13 on third down conversions. That's one of the reasons why they won that game. And then if you even look at just at their efficiency on first downs, they had more first downs than the Vikings. Vikings had 21. Giants had 28. You know what helps them get that? 7 of 13 on third down. And they got surprisingly they got most of their first downs on the passing. They had 15 passing first downs, but they also had 11 rushing first downs. So they were very balanced. So it's going to be up to the Eagles to get them in that third and long situations, to put Daniel Jones in those positions where he just can't pick a receiver and get them, it's 3rd and 5, 3rd and 4, pick a receiver, Hodgins, James Jr., Slayton, Daniel Bellinger, Saquon Barkley, the ball on 3rd and short, they convert. No, get them in them 3rd and long situations, because we look at the Vikings defense, even though they were horrific against the pass, as they allowed Daniel Jones still for 300 yards for the second time against them this season. They did sack him 3 times in this game. They did sack him 3 times, but they only got 4 quarterback hits on him. That's not enough. That's not enough. That number 3 is good, 3 sacks is good, but you need to have a little bit more, quarterback hits. That means you're not getting pressure, right? You're not getting pressure to where he feels comfortable. Or what we saw Daniel Jones, and I think this is also going to be another key, Harrison. We saw Daniel Jones use his legs a lot last week and was able to make that Vikings defense pay when we're talking about where he had 78 rushing yards on 17 carries. He was doing his best Jalen Hurts impersonation with 78 yards or 17 carries. If you're the Eagles, you cannot allow that to happen. So now we're talking about not even pressure on that defensive line. We're talking about now pressure on those linebackers to make sure Daniel Jones does not escape that pocket to create, potential more first downs with his legs, because that was also a real huge factor in that game and why they were able to beat the Vikings last week.
It's an underrated part of his game, and it's something the Eagles have seen firsthand with his 80-yard run and bumble and stumble fall at the end of it, back a couple of years ago in the red zone. But it's an underrated part of his game. I think it's been a big part of his step forward this year. I don't know if I'm calling it the elevation yet, but let's say step forward from where Daniel Jones was. I think that his legs and his mobility has certainly helped him. So that's going to be a big point. Another thing you mentioned, just kind of him in those 3rd and 4 situations where he can quick dink and dunk it to Hodgins, Barkley. Are we really worried about the Giants' downfield passing attack? Is that what you look at the Giants and say you're worried about? So I think that's going to be key. Like you said, putting them in those 3rd and longs, making them be in those downfield passing attacks, trying to have Daniel Jones look downfield, the guys like Hodgins. I think the Eagles will have the matchup there with Darius Slay and James Bradbury. I think, but like you said, those 3rd and 4, 2nd and 5 even, where they can just quick it to Saquon Barkley or just get the ball out of Daniel Jones' hands quick, or even pick it up with the run game with a quick 5-yard run. I think keeping the Eagles in positive down and distance, keeping the Giants far away from that line, that first down marker is going to be key.
Definitely going to be key. So we'll see what happens there. 3rd downs, win or loss. Eagles defense this season on 3rd down, they were about average. I think they were about average. I think they were like 37, 36% on conversion rates for on the defensive side, allowing 3rd downs, which wasn't bad. It's about, so like I said, it's about average in the league, about 15th, 16th, between 14th and 16th in the NFL. However, at home, I think that number goes down to 34% on 3rd down conversion. So there's a difference, and that's going to be, like I said, that's going to be where the game's going to be won at. Can the Eagles get that Giants defense offense off the field? Can you get back-to-back 3 and outs on that offense, and your offense come out and put up 10 points, and you're up 10-0? Because I don't believe that this Giants offense, we saw them go back and forth with the Vikings, but I don't know if they can go back and forth or even be down a 10-0, 13-0 lead, and now you're putting them in a spot where they have to throw, they have to run, they have to play a little bit quicker on offense to get everything going for them. So we'll see what happens there, especially like we said on defense, which is going to be the key. The linebackers, the front 7 definitely will have to be on their A game on Saturday night. And then the last storyline that we are paying attention to, in this matchup is the Eagles playmakers versus the Giants defense. Eagles, like we said, have a lot of playmakers, Harrison, who can make a lot of plays. And we saw that a little bit in the Week 18 game, but we saw it a lot in that 20 point plus blowout back in Week 14 at MetLife Stadium.
And one of the most, I guess, encouraging things for this week about that 20-point blowout in Week 14 was that Dallas Goedert wasn't on the field, and he will be this week. And I think that could be something that the Eagles really look to exploit, getting him involved in different ways. I think that could definitely be a way that the Eagles can attack them. But I feel pretty comfortable overall. Now, the Giants do have a strong secondary. I'm not going to lie. It's a talented group. I think it's going to be a group that improves over the years. I think they've got some pieces there, kind of a foundation they can build with. I feel comfortable saying that the Eagles have the upper hand in the matchup still, though. They held Justin Jefferson to a measly, I believe, let's see here, 47 yards last week in the wild card game. That's not the numbers you're expecting from Justin Jefferson and just that Vikings offense as a whole. They did a good job covering them last week. I think the Eagles have a little bit more of that dynamic and versatile pass catcher group, though. I really do. I think with A.J. Brown, and even when we go back to our first conversation about this game, looking back to the Bucs game last year and what can they learn from that, Eagles didn't have A.J. Brown on the field last year. It's such an important piece of the offense this year.
It's a difference maker. He's a difference maker.
Changer.
And I don't think people realize that. Even like when he was with Tennessee, it was like, all right, he's good. But we knew that Tennessee offense was built around Derrick Henry. Right now, he's in an offense where it's not built around, like it is built around the running game, but he's playing an offense where he has a Jalen Hurts, where he has a Devontae Smith, who a lot of people believe is the number one wide receiver in his own right and could be a number one receiver on other teams in the league.
I think they're like 1A and 1B. It's not even fair to call Devontae the 2. You know, it's really not. Like AJ
really is 1A,
the guy statistically, and you know, he might. I guess he's more established in the NFL at this point, has more of the name brand. But we saw it last year when Devontae was the number one. As a rookie, he was completely comfortable in that role, and he really was the number one that year. I mean, with all due respect to Quez Watkins and Jalen Reagor and those likes, it was Devontae as the pass catcher. Having A.J. Brown and Devontae out there has been so big for the Eagles this year. I think it's going to be a big thing for this game. I like the Giants secondary. I do. I mentioned that a few minutes ago. Guys like Adoree Jackson, who just came back for the wild card game and played good against Justin Jefferson. Xavier McKinney and Julian Love at the safety spot. I think that's the foundation right there. That's two really good young players that they can build around who work well off of each other. So it's a scrappy defense. I like their defense. Really, what I really noticed that I liked their defense so much was the 2021 game against the Eagles when they beat the Eagles in that tough game, and it was late in the season. It was really just a flattening loss for the Eagles. But that Giants defense was the reason they won that game. I think they held.
It was like what 13 points. It was like 13-7, right?
Right. It was there you go. Right, 7. So yeah, that Giants defense is a scrappy defense. They played good against Minnesota last week. Kind of contained Dalvin Cook as well, stopping the run. So that's going to be a factor as well this week. That Giants defense.
A huge factor. So we'll see, like we said, how everything plays out. We will see if these storylines will kind of play a big role, and if they do, who will come out on the winning side of those things. Because based on what we have listed, if whoever wins that one, whoever wins each of these storylines will probably ultimately win this game on Saturday night. So we'll see what happens there. And speaking on Saturday night, we got to wrap up the show doing our predictions. So prediction time here on the podcast. I do not have no special music or nothing like that for for our predictions. Eagles, like I said, coming into this matchup as the overall number 1 seed in the NFC, going against the 6th-seeded Giants. The last time these two teams met up in the playoffs was in 2008. That was the year the Eagles went to the NFC title game. Surprisingly, went to the NFC title game against the Falcons. Almost won it. I mean, not the Falcons, the Cardinals. Got my wrong bird.
Warner, Larry Fitz,
Arizona Cardinals. Amazing. Super Bowls in Arizona. I'm not trying to draw parallels, but you get my drift here. You get my drift here. But they beat the Giants that year 23-11. David Akers hit like 3 field goals in that game. McNabb had 2 interceptions. Eli Manning had a couple interceptions, but McNabb had a touchdown pass and a touchdown run. And hey, they were able to advance and move on to the NFC title game against, like you said, Kurt Warner and the Cardinals, who then went on to go play in the Super Bowl against James Harrison and the Steelers. So we know how that all that played out. That being said, Eagles 7.5-point favorites against the Giants at your local various sports books that you may have in your state. Eagles favored on the money line at -360, Giants at +290, and the over-under is 48.5. That all being said, Harrison, who do you like to win this game on Saturday?
I'm going to go with history. You mentioned the 2008 Eagles and that win. I also went back and looked and saw in 2006, the wild card round, Eagles beat the Giants 23-20. David Akers game-winning field goal. Jeff Garcia
I remember that.
started that game for the Eagles.
I
That was Jeff
remember that.
Garcia's playoff win, and they lost to the Saints next week. So I'm going to go
Yes,
with
they
history.
did.
You mentioned the 2008 game, 23-11 as well. That's 23 scores. I'm going to stick with it. How about 23-17? Eagles win. I don't think that 7.5 spread is exactly enticing.
No.
We were talking pre-show.
No.
That's a lot of points for a playoff game. All right.
A lot of points.
Skylar Thompson and the Miami Dolphins, who were, I believe, 14.5-point underdogs, lose by 3. 7.5 points in a playoff game, and I just don't love it. That's a lot of points. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the Eagles will blow them out and win by 20.
We would like that.
Right. We can all look back and laugh, but 7.5 points does feel like a spread I'm going to fade. So I'm going to stick with history, 2008, 2006, keep the 23 trend going and go 23-17. And just quickly here, I'm going to fade the spread. All right. I'm going to fade the 7.5 spread. I'm going to sprinkle some Boston Scott anytime touchdown, though.
All right.
The New York Giant killer. He's done it so many times. Did it back in week 18 in the red zone. Some burrito money. If Keaton was here, he would appreciate that reference. Some burrito money on a Boston Scott anytime touchdown.
Yes, Boston Scott plus 430 on FanDuel. That's really good odds for, like you said, a guy that somehow, some way, he scored the touchdown. I think half his touchdowns in his NFL career have come against the Giants. He's had 17 total touchdowns. 8 or 9 of them have just come against the Giants alone. He just shows up every time he see Big Blue on the field. He just comes out and plays. So I definitely like that. I agree with you on all aspects. For me, I agree with you. I think 7.5 is a lot for this Giants team just because they've been very good against the spread, not only on the road, but just as an underdog. They do not wilter to nobody. They were 3-point underdogs last week, and they end up winning outright. They will be competitive. I think they will play well. I think that their defense, Wink Martindale, they will apply some pressure. However, that being said, I think the Eagles come away with the victory on Saturday night. I'm leaning to a score of, I'm trying to think, what did I have it as? I'm leaning towards 27-21. Eagles win 27-21. Just barely goes under the total at 48.5. So sorry for anybody if that happens. God bless. Eagles win 27-21. I think Jalen Hurts, we see the Jalen Hurts of old that was having an MVP campaign before he hurts his shoulder. I think this is a huge game for Dallas Goedert just based off of, just so we saw TJ Hawkinson, what he was able to do against this Giants defense. I think that's a huge weak point that nobody's really talking about. This team is susceptible to getting beat by tight ends, and I think Goddard could have a very big game in store. So if you're looking for a touchdown play, why not throw something on Dallas Goedert? I think with so much attention that A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith are going to Gardner, it could open up something for Dallas Goedert to make some plays, and they're going to need him in this playoff run. If they want to go where they need to go, he's going to have to step up and be that de facto third wide receiver pass catching threat for him. So I like the Eagles to win 27-21 to move on to the NFC title game to face the winner of the Cowboys and Niners. I do not know who's going to win that game, but God forbid if it's the Cowboys, it's Cowboys Eagles for the NFC title game. That will be of some epic apocalyptic type stuff that I don't think no one's prepared for, but we'll see. We got to get through the games first on all angles to see what happens. But I do like the Eagles to win on Saturday night by 6, 27-21.
I do too, and I don't want to get ahead of myself about that Eagles-Cowboys matchup, but I've certainly thought about it and talked about it with my friends. And hey, listen, man, we're a game away from something really crazy happening, and I think the city would just about explode if it did. It happened back in 1980, actually, back when Jaws took the Eagles to the Super Bowl.
Trash talking would be at an all-time high.
Goodness. Sports radio here, we would tune into Nick every week. Nick would be going crazy on WIP.
Sports radio, social media.
Yeah.
It would just be a cesspool of just outrageousness. I mean, First Take will love it, obviously. I mean,
yeah, of course. And then that game atmosphere, I can only imagine what the link would be like for an Eagles versus Cowboys. You remember when it was Eagles Vikings? What the link was like?
Oh yeah,
imagine Eagles Cowboys.
Oh, insane. So, it would be insane. So, but hey, this is what happens when you have the perks of the number 1 seed. You only have to win 2 to get to the Super Bowl instead of 3. So the Eagles The job for them is set for them to get to where they need to go. They now have to come out and execute, and it starts Saturday night against those New York Giants. But that's going to wrap up this edition of the podcast. Again, really appreciate everyone that tunes in and checks out this podcast on your various streaming platforms. As always, like I said, make sure you're following us on Twitter at Total Sports Live. Make sure you're checking out the website, totalsportslive.com. Still got a lot of great stuff for everyone coming out over these next couple of months. XFL season is starting soon, so we're going to be doing a lot of different XFL things. Really excited to dive in and do a lot of little different things outside of just what what everybody else is doing, NFL, stuff like that. So we're going to do a lot of different things with that with the XFL coming up. Hopefully we'll find out about the USFL draft if we get any news about that coming up. We'll also try to keep track of, players that are re-signing or joining the USFL. We'll try to keep you guys up to date about that. NFL draft stuff, you already know we're going to be coming back and giving you everything that you need. Their NFL draft notebook from Harrison, draft prospect interviews, anything draft related. You already know where to find it. TotalSportsLive.com. I think that's the best way to say it. TotalSportsLive.com. Make sure, again, if you want to listen to the podcast, listen to these interviews, draft prospect interviews, make sure you're following the podcast on Spotify, Apple Music, Google Podcasts, Anchor, search TSL Podcast, Total Sports Live Podcast. Make sure you're following Harrison on YouTube as well. I think it's Harry Brown-Russo. I think that's what it is on YouTube. So make sure you're doing that as well. So you'll be able to watch this episode and also all the things that we're, doing and uploading, recording. It'll all be right there for you. One-stop shop right there. I think that's pretty much everything that I was supposed to say at that point, Harrison.
That's it right there. I thought that was perfect. I think you hit everything we've got on the docket. We've got a lot on the docket. Football season does not end when the Super Bowl final whistle. We've got football all year this year, especially with the XFL, the USFL, the draft stuff, like you mentioned. Got a lot of fun stuff coming up with that. Just finished up the notebook with the Hula Bowl finished up. Had to go back and make some little tweaks, some things I saw in that All-Star game, but that's coming out for you guys soon. So, yeah, got a lot of good stuff coming up on TSL.com. Make sure you guys are tuned in.
Yeah, definitely make sure everyone's tuned in. That's going to wrap this one up. Again, everyone have a good one. Enjoy the game on Saturday. We'll see what happens. Regardless of what happens, we'll be back next week to break it all down. Hopefully, we're talking about the Eagles win and moving on to the NFC title game. But, God forbid if it doesn't, then we'll be back to recap what went wrong. But for me and Harrison, everyone have a good one. We'll talk to you all very soon.